Okay, everyone. Unfortunately, we had a little snafu with the original recording. There's something wrong with the AV in the lecture hall, so I'm going to re-record the lecture from last week. So without further ado, here we're going to talk a little bit about the psychological characteristics of peak performance. Of course, we're going to start with the game plan for the day, so I'm going to talk you through tutorial 1 that begins this week now. We'll talk a little bit about the mini exam that you have available on Canvas. I'll go through talking about peak performance, and then we'll finish with talking about your finding your eyes off and then what's coming up next. Okay, so in regards to tutorial 1, you'll remember that there are 2 pieces to this. There's the group part and then the individual part. So the group part of the tutorial is what you're going to be doing actually in class this week. So this is what you'll work on in those 2 tutorial section times. So the primary purpose of this assignment is to help you develop and plan a practice schedule that meets certain coaching objectives in order to develop athlete outcomes. So your reading for this, the Coate and Gilbert reading, defines not only what coaching effectiveness and expertise is, but also gives some recommendations on coaching objectives depending on age and performance level. So for this, because it is a practice schedule, feel free to use bullet points in order to outline the practice plan, and then you also need to include several sentences or descriptions of the purpose of the actual practice items that you're including. So the structure there is very loose. You don't feel like you have to write it all out. And then you've got 800 words for that. Again, this does not include any references that you might include there. It also doesn't include your title or your declaration of originality or names or anything like that. So that 800 words is only for the actual content of your paper. Okay, and then that is due at the end of tutorial time. So that's something that needs to be submitted on Canvas, making sure you're putting that under the right tutorial 1, so make sure that it says group. And then also you need to really make sure that all your group members' names are on that submission. Additionally, these tutorials are required, they are mandatory, and so I'll talk about that in a little bit, but Taylor is going to be there to facilitate these for you, and it's important that you are in attendance. So the specific instructions here is what we're really looking for is for you to define coaching effectiveness using this description as given by Coate and Gilbert. And then we want you to select one of the age ranges or focuses available in Table 2 in the article, and that's page 317. And so what you need to do is develop a practice plan that meets all 5 of the stated aims within those different contexts. So first and foremost, you need to pick one of those age range and focuses, and then you need to go even further in defining your team setting. So give us the actual age, the sex of the players, what sport you're playing, and then also any coaching staff makeup. So if there's just you as a head coach, or maybe there's a head coach with some assistants. So give us sort of the context in which you're looking at this. And then you need to create a practice plan. And so I want that to be something that is all inclusive of when the athletes show up to practice, so everything from warm-up, greetings, explanations, all the way through the end, so cool down, concluding remarks to the time that they leave. So, be creative. It also obviously needs to be sports specific, so hopefully you pick a sport that one of the members at least has some experience doing, so you need to talk about the actual drills that you'd be doing, and then how maybe you're working in conditioning, or maybe there's some games involved. So really making sure that you're sort of outlining everything, and then including brief descriptors of why you're doing this, why you're talking to your athletes the way that you are, how you're separating them out for skills and different drills and things. So you need to be as descriptive as possible there. And then I also want you to be conscientious of the fact that we've talked some about the self-fulfilling prophecy and the expectation performance process, right? So as good coaching staff, you know that these are potential pitfalls for you, so I want you to make sure that you're also paying attention to how you are maintaining your expectations and then your behaviors around expectations and sort of how that's going to influence your athletes, so make sure you're keeping that in mind as well. Okay, and then again, you also need to be making sure that you're being very clear as to why and how you're meeting these aims and sort of how each practice item is geared towards that. Okay, some other particulars here. So these are the times and locations for those. So if you're in tutorial group 2, you're on Tuesday. Tutorial group 1, you are on Wednesday. Okay, and then as I said, Taylor Burns will be leading those for you. So he'll have sort of a brief introduction again, and then we'll have you guys get into groups and get you going. Important that you bring your computer for this. We expect that you guys are all working together on this to put it together, and so that might require looking up some different drills or different skill type activities that you would need to do for the specific sport that you're looking at. So it'd be helpful if everyone had their computer for that, especially too since it needs to be submitted on Canvas. So it'll need to be a digital copy that you're turning in. And again, attendance is mandatory. So once you get in there, Taylor will put you into groups. Not only does every group member's name need to be on the sheet when you turn it in, Taylor will be coming around and having you sign in under the different groups that he assigns you to. So we will make sure that you are all in attendance. So make sure you are there. In addition to tutorial group aspect, you also have an individual side of that, and going along with the coaching theme, we're going to have you write your own personal coaching philosophy. So the reading that you should have for this is the Van Mullen and Berner. That actually talks about how to develop a successful coaching philosophy. Okay, you've got 500 words for that, and it's due the 31st of August, and you're going to submit that on Canvas, making sure you put that on the tutorial 1 individual. Okay, so specific instructions for that is we're really looking for you to develop your own coaching philosophy. So what you need to do is also sort of describe the context of your coaching environment. Again, this does not need to be something real or something that you're necessarily going to do, but we want you to give yourself some context and sort of the age, the sport, participation versus performance, sort of the level that you're looking to coach. And then I just want you to imagine yourself as a new coach. And I want you to consider exactly what kind of coach you want to be. Okay, so you need to highlight your philosophy's focused and why you're structuring it the way that you are, and how it's going to look at athletes, and really what you want your athletes to accomplish, what you want them to come away with after having had you as a coach. And then I also want you to be creative here, so and authentic. So be sure to, if you want to, add some quotes or pictures or maybe something that embodies your philosophy, maybe some song lyrics, whatever. So it should really reflect who you are and who you want to be as a coach. So those won't, pictures and stuff won't count towards your word count. But if there's something like that that really sort of hits home for you, feel free to incorporate that as well. Okay, so then as far as the mini exam goes here, so you've got one on Canvas that's open for the week. We are going to be doing the midterm exam through Canvas, and so this is sort of a trial run here, so go ahead and take advantage of taking that little mini exam, and let me know how that goes. The midterm exam, which will be held on the 31st of August, the anticipation there is that you will take that, you won't have to come into class to take that, you'll just take that via Canvas, and so we want to make sure that everything's going to work for that, so go ahead and take advantage of the online option to take that. So okay, let's jump into talking about peak performance. What is it? Okay, so peak performance is specifically a singular specific episode of superior functioning. So it's actually an individual event in which superior functioning occurs. And it includes sort of both the physical and psychological aspects of performance, right? So this mind-body connection, it's got to be working together, both of those factors, in order to reach peak performance. And it's also more likely to occur, right, when the athlete's skill matches the challenge. So if the challenge is sort of pushing you to sort of really excel or really push yourself, that's going to be a good context. Conversely, right, if you are a really high-level athlete and the challenge is really low, right, that's not really going to necessarily be pushing you to perform at your best. The opposite would also be true, right? If you're, not a very skilled athlete and you're put into a very challenging situation, that's not going to help foster you working at your best either, right? Because you're sort of in over your head. So it's really important that the challenge matches the skill in order for an individual to be able to reach peak performance. Often results in achieving personal best, right? If you're at your peak, you should be recording a PR, right? So it makes sense that would be a personal best. It's also important to note that peak performance is associated with a number of different concepts. Flow being one, the individualized zone of optimal functioning, and then also this idea of mental toughness. So we're going to talk about each of these specific concepts here in more depth. So first, this idea of flow. So flow is defined as a state in which you're so involved with the activity that nothing else seems to matter, right? Everything sort of falls to the wayside. You're just totally in the moment. Everything that's happening around you sort of fades away, and you're just sort of engrossed with what actions sort of you're performing as part of the sport. And it's also one of those factors that's often considered to be a precursor, sort of an underlying psychological process associated with peak performance. So they often sort of go hand in hand. So when an individual is experiencing flow, it often results in peak performance as well. So important to know that those contexts are often linked. So let's talk a little bit about some of the characteristics of the experience associated with flow. So again, sort of this idea of matching the difficulty of the situation with the skills is really important. Your awareness and action sort of happen at the same time. You know exactly what your goals are. You have full concentration, and everything sort of feels effortless. You sort of lose that fear of failure because you're just so engrossed in the moment. You lose that idea, again, of self-consciousness or fear of failure. And time really starts to slow down, and it becomes just sort of a joy to do the activity in itself. Sort of all the worries and the pressures, all of those things start to really fall away, and you're just really engrossed and totally one with what you're doing at the moment. So this experience of flow is one that athletes often seek out. Although they don't necessarily get to experience it all that often. So it's really important to sort of understand the psychological underpinnings, and then we're going to talk about too in just a little bit sort of how we would help an individual sort of as consistently or frequently as possibly be able to reach this state of flow and peak performance. Another concept that's important to consider is this individualized zone of optimal functioning. So this is more concerned specifically with the emotions that are related to performance. So it specifically helps to, or seeks to help individuals identify both positive and negative emotions associated with peak performance, and helping an individual find which ones are going to be most effective for them as an individual performer. So it's very much individualized. Obviously, they've got that there in the title, but let's talk about some of the 4 primary groups of emotions that they tend to, this model identifies. So you've got sort of your positive performance enhancing feelings. So those are the things that are typically positive and are going to be really helpful. So feeling energetic or feeling excited, sort of feeling a good level of arousal. Those tend to be generally positive feelings, and they tend to enhance performance. You might also have some positive impairing feelings. Those might be sort of contentness, or sort of, easygoing. That might not be optimal for peak performance, right? It might actually sort of impair your ability to perform at your peak, although they might be pleasant in and of themselves, not necessarily for performance. You might also have some negative feelings that can be performance enhancing. So this idea of the right amount of tension, right, or maybe dissatisfaction, right, those can be really helpful in helping you get ready to perform. But you also want to make sure that they don't go too far and becoming impairing feelings, right? So if you've got your level of anger is maybe too high, or maybe your tension is too high, those can then sort of detract from performance. Right, so it's important too to identify which of these are going to be most impactful or important for an individual. Is to find sort of both, the positive performance enhancing or maybe negative performance enhancing, but then also knowing sort of when you've crossed the line and maybe those become impairing feelings, and those are going to be different for each individual. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this eyes off in the application corner in a little bit. So this next idea of mental toughness is something that you've probably heard before, and is one that is consistently used in the realm of sports psychology, right? And it's sort of this idea that there are specific athletes who just have really high sort of psychological states in which that allows them to perform very consistently at a high level, right? So it's this idea of this unshakable belief that you can achieve your goals regardless of setbacks or obstacles. So it's really important to sort of really sort of nose to the grindstone, right? That you just keep working working with this unshakable belief no matter what sort of gets in your way. And this idea that it is consistent is that it sort of happens long term, right? And you consistently prioritize long term sport goals over other life goals, but still with the ability to sort of switch it off to sort of maintain a balanced life, because that's also ultimately going to contribute to success as well. So it's this unshakable belief that you can continue to perform at your best regardless of setbacks, right? And you still put those sport goals over everything else in your life. And sort of how we would see this is during competition, again, it's that unshakable belief, your ability to stay focused, right? The sporting context can be quite chaotic, so you need to be able to stay focused on what's in your controllable realm, but then also not let sort of the chaos of coaches, fans, weather get in your way, right? And that comes down to then your ability to regulate your performance, coping well with pressure, right? A lot of the elite level athletes, we think about Michael Johnson and Michael Phelps, right? When the competition level is so high and so close, right? You're beating people by milliseconds, right? It really, comes down to your ability to cope with the pressure and sort of your psychological, mental toughness, strength to carry you across the finish line before anyone else, right? And you also need to be aware of and be able to control your thoughts and feelings, right? So you might have some feelings about pressure, but how mentally aware are you, or how mentally tough are you and able to control those, right? And then also sort of your ability to sort of control as much of your environment as possible, and that has a lot to do with your actions, your thoughts, and your feelings, right? So your ability to sort of keep those in the good realm. But it also comes into play after competition, right? So how able are you to focus on either the failure or the success after a competition? Are you able to cope with those things? Are you able to learn from those things? Truly mentally tough people are able to take something away, not just from success, but from failures too, right? They can use that to motivate themselves towards future successes, right? So there are sometimes, very public and very painful failures or losses that have really spurred athletes forward into then greater sport achievement in the future. So it's important for mentally tough athletes to be able to cope and learn. So those are some of the big concepts associated with peak performance. So this idea of meeting flow, finding your eyes off, and then also sort of having some mental toughness to yourself. So we're going to talk now a little bit about the psychological characteristics in total, and then some of the attributes, and ultimately then the skills that help foster these things. So when we think about the psychological characteristics of peak performance, and again, these are associated actually with what's happening in the moment that peak performance is happening. Remember, this is episodic, so it's just something that happens in a particular instance. And so these are the psychological characteristics that go along with actually the moment of peak performance. Again, it's this loss of fear, right? No fear of failure. You are totally immersed in the activity. Your focus becomes really narrow. You're not worried about past mistakes or what's going to happen in the future. You're sort of totally attuned to the present. You feel like you're in complete control. And then there's sort of a time or space distortion. Usually it's slow down, but maybe it's speed up. You looked up and all of a sudden it's 3 hours later and where is time gone? Right? And then performance starts to feel sort of effortless, automatic, and you just have complete control over what's going on. You feel highly self-confident, right? Again, it's sort of letting that loss of fear go. You're not really worried about the pressure or about performing perfectly. You just really feel good in the moment. And it's this sort of ironic balance between being relaxed and highly energized, is sort of finding that really good optimal level for yourself, that you're not overly aroused, but you're not under aroused either. Sort of find that really good balance. And this is sort of what athletes who have experienced peak performance then report of. This is sort of how I felt in the moment. It just felt so good. I didn't care about anything else. I just felt like I had complete control, right? So this is sort of how they relate the actual experience of going through a peak performance episode. But we also know that there are athletes who are a bit more consistent in their performance and are able to reach this level of peak performance consistently. And these individuals have a number of different psychological attributes that sort of set them apart. So these are the types of things that they do sort of day in and day out. So it's not necessarily specifically associated with a particular episode of peak performance, But this is what they do consistently. I like to refer to this as sort of the mental legwork of achieving peak performance, right? So they have total commitment to their sport. They know what their goals are, right? They have high self-confidence or self-efficacy, right? So they're very confident in their particular sporting context. They tend to have a positive attitude, right? Again, that's the ability to sort of learn from failure and sort of be able to cope with that and sort of have a positive attitude going forward. They know how to control their arousal. And then they also have a facilitative interpretation of anxiety. So this idea of sort of getting the butterflies, right? They don't necessarily view that as a bad thing, right? That starts to feel like, okay, this is me gearing up for competition, right? So they see that as a good thing, right? And that can be really helpful. They also know how to concentrate and focus. And then when that gets distracted, which inevitably it will, they know how to refocus then, right? And primarily that focuses on performance. They can cope well with stress and distractions, and they have the ability to rebound from mistakes. And again, that's that idea of refocusing. And so these are the things that they do in training, right? In competitions, before, after, during. They sort of use all of these attributes consistently across their sporting context, whether that be training or actually competing. And so these are the types of attributes that really help then foster their ability to reach peak performance and experience some of the psychological characteristics associated with peak performance. Okay, so these are more descriptive, right? So these are the characteristics that I just talked about were those that are associated specifically with the peak performance instant. And these psychological attributes are sort of the things that individuals tend to do, ones that are more consistent at achieving peak performance. But these are sort of a bit more trait-like, right? These are just, things that they do. But what we want to do as sport and exercise psychology consultants, right, is really foster an individual's ability to sort of have these attributes and reach peak performance and experience those psychological characteristics, right? So we want to be influential in sort of teaching these. And that comes back to then the psychological skills, right? So we want to be able to teach athletes and coaches how to use some skills to then be able to foster this relationship with the attributes and the characteristics. So some of the skills that we might utilize with athletes would be using some imagery. So actually having them visualize themselves in the sport setting, maybe imagining something going wrong in an instance where they lose concentration and then they have to refocus. So how can we practice that in the mind's eye? Imagery would help us do that. How can we give them attentional focus cues, right? So what do I need to be focusing on in the sporting environment depending on the context, right? If we're behind, or if, my role for the team is on a basketball team is really to be rebounding. Where does my attentional focus really need to be on in order for me to perform and fulfill my role on the team, right? So we can talk about sort of where the focus needs to be. Maybe we're going to talk about attention next time, but really focusing on a narrow internal attention is going to be really beneficial for performance. So we would talk about how they would do that. How to maintain concentration, right? So not letting little things sort of get in the way. So not getting frazzled by bad calls, or not getting frazzled by opponents doing something unexpected, or the weather being bad, right? So how can we give them the skills to be able to maintain their concentration and control anxiety activation, right? So we might have them do some progressive muscle relaxation if they really need to control their anxiety. Maybe we'll do some breathing activities. Things like that can be really helpful in maintaining or controlling those types of things. Having some positive self-talk, right? We talked about sort of having a positive attitude is a really important attribute, right? So how we can teach people to do that. Not everyone's naturally positive, but we can foster that and talk about how do you talk to yourself? Is that helpful or is it not? And how can we make that a little bit more positive and people can learn how to do that? We might also provide some more structured goal setting, right? Having really good, strong goals, things that you prioritize. And so how can we actually sit down with an athlete and talk about what those need to be? So a number of these we're going to talk about here in the next several weeks, several lectures. We're going to talk about attention, concentration, imagery, goal setting. So we'll actually get into sort of how we would develop these skills and how we would work with athletes on them. But these are really important skills for athletes to understand how to utilize in fostering this physical, psychological combination in the ability to reach peak performance. It's also important to note that there are a number of social influencing factors that come into play here as well for peak performance, both positive and negative. So on the positive side, last time we talked a little bit about group cohesion and how that's really important. So having a good team leader can help facilitate team goals and really can help influence peak performance. You know, if you've got a good cohesive unit, we know that that's associated with performance sort of from a group standpoint, but that can also be really important for facilitating that from an individual standpoint. We also know that coaches are a big factor in ability to perform at one's best. So if you've got a coach, right, with a good, strong commitment, they've got a clear performance plan for you to follow, that's going to give you really good, clear goals for yourself, right? And so that's going to be really helpful in fostering peak performance. Also, your social network sort of outside of sport as well. So, you know, parents, family, friends, having good social and emotional support, encouragement, sort of people to lean on when things get tough can be really influential and important, right? Because having that idea that people are caring and concerned about you and people that you can go to and turn to for support is really important. On the opposite side, right, there might also be some negative influential factors. So obviously coaches, again, feature prominently here. So if you've got a coach that doesn't know how to deal with crisis or has bad expectations, low or high for you, right, we know that that can influence their behavior towards you and then influence the athlete's behavior in turn, right? Or if there's, you know, overcoaching or excessive interactions, or maybe, you know, is indecisive or does not make fair decisions, right? That's really going to play into then the psychological aspect of the athletes on those teams, right? They don't have a clear plan. They don't know how to set their goals, right? It would be hard for them to concentrate and be able to maintain focus if things are constantly changing and the coach is throwing too much information at them. So that can be really a big detriment to performance. And the same goes for sort of organizational stress. Traveling, schedule times, right? So those are all sort of more logistical type things, but showing up late for a game and having to hurry to put all your stuff on and not having sort of the same warm-up time, doing your pre-performance routine, those types of things can really put a wrench in your plan, right? So having sort of all of those things be out of whack can be really detrimental to performance too. So it's important to consider that there are some social contextual factors to this that also need to be considered. So sort of having more of these positive sides can be really helpful or influential. And then, as always, I like to have some video resources for you. So there's mental fitness here and then also a flow. This flow video actually interviews some different extreme sport athletes and talks about their experiences of flow. A little bit more intense, right? Extreme sports tend to have sort of a life and death element to them as well. So a really good one to watch. I also wanted to make a note here as well. The midterm exam, the one that's coming up here, is going to be all inclusive of the material that's covered in this course up to sort of that midterm point. So all of the textbook readings, all of the lectures, all of the outside required or recommended readings, and then as well as the videos. I may not show them in class, but those that are included would be a good resource for you to have watched to do well on the exam. So I really do encourage you to go ahead and watch these videos that I post for you. Okay, so I'm gonna pause here and include the previous recording because some of the lecture did record. So I'm going to pause here and you can listen to the end of the lecture on the next link where I talk about and show you the eyes off and then the rest of today's keys and the upcoming things. So sorry this is in two parts, but I wanted to make sure those of you that weren't here on Thursday got a bit of the lecture as well. So go ahead and listen to that next link. Thanks so much.